Close your eyes for a moment and picture this. It's the year 1275, and you're standing on a windswept ridge in medieval Europe. The air bites at your skin, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine. Below, a village clings to life, smoke curling from thatched roofs as the first snowflakes dust the ground. You've got no phone, no flashlight, no delivery app to save you. If you want to eat tonight, you'll need to outsmart the forest. If you want to stay warm, you'll have to wrestle heat from the cold itself. Welcome to boring history, where we don't just dust off the past. We drag you into its raw, relentless heart. Today, we're diving into the forgotten survival skills of the medieval world, the kind of stubborn, brilliant know-how that kept people alive when every day was a gamble. This isn't about knights or castles. It's about the shepherds, wanderers, and peasants who turned sticks, stones, and sheer will into tools for survival. Grab a seat by the fire, because we're about to walk through a world where hesitation meant death, and ingenuity was the only way out. Let's start with the basics, the kind of skills you'd need the second you stepped into this unforgiving landscape. Imagine you're a shepherd, miles from any village, your flock grazing on a rocky slope. A wolf's howl cuts through the dusk, and you know you've got to act fast. You don't reach for a bow or a blade. Those are for lords with coin. Instead, you pull out a sling, a weapon older than the hills you're standing on. It's just a braided cord and a leather pouch, but in skilled hands, it's deadly. You pick a smooth stone from the riverbed, spin the sling above your head, the hum of the cord slicing the air. Release at the perfect moment, and that stone flies faster than an arrow, capable of stunning a hare, knocking out a bird, or scaring off that wolf. This wasn't a knight's toy. It belonged to the common folk, the ones who lived beyond the safety of walls. Boys learned it young, practicing on tree trunks or tossing fruit into the air to hone their aim. With enough skill, a sling could rival an early crossbow, silent and precise, all from materials you could scavenge in an afternoon. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a way of life, proof that survival didn't need steel, just practice and a sharp eye. But hunting wasn't always about chasing prey. Sometimes you let the forest do the work for you. Picture yourself as a traveler, your stomach growling, no village in sight. You find a game trail near a stream, the earth worn by hooves. With a knife and a bit of patience, you bend a young sapling, tying it with vine to a trigger notched from sticks. Sprinkle some berries as bait, and when a deer or rabbit steps into the snare, the sapling snaps upward, tightening the noose. These slingshot traps were genius, quiet, reusable, and needing no forge or iron. You could set dozens along a trail, check them at dawn, and have breakfast waiting. Pair them with pitfall traps, where a hidden hole snags a deer or deadfalls, where a heavy log drops on smaller game, and you've got a system that hunts while you sleep. What made these traps so brilliant was their adaptability. Break a sling, braid another from bark. Miss a trap, reset it in minutes. No blacksmith needed, just hands that knew the land and a mind that refused to starve. Now, let's talk about fire, because without it, you're just a cold, hungry shadow in the dark. Fire wasn't something you flicked on with a lighter. It was a ritual, a skill etched into your bones. Every traveler, from soldiers to shepherds, carried a tinderbox, a small metal or wooden case holding a piece of flint, a steel striker, and char cloth, blackened linen ready to catch a spark. You'd strike the flint at a sharp angle, sending tiny, fleeting sparks flying like stars. Catch one on the char cloth, and it glows, a fragile coal you cradle in a nest of dry grass or bark shavings. Blow gently, steady your breath, and that coal becomes flame. The slow, deliberate, almost sacred, but it worked even in rain if your materials were dry. Fire meant warmth, cooked food, safety from wolves, and light to keep the night at bay. Peasants tied tinderboxes to belts. Soldiers tucked them in satchels. Even nobles carried them because no one, rich or poor, could afford to be without fire. In a world where a single spark could mean life or death, this little kit was power in your pocket. But what if you lose your tinderbox? Maybe a storm sweeps your gear away, or you're stranded in the wild. That's where the bow drill comes in, a tool so ancient it feels like magic. Picture yourself in a dripping forest, shivering, with only a knife and determination. You carve a spindle from hazel, a flat hearthboard from willow, and string a bough from twisted bark. Press the spindle into a notched hearth, saw the bough back and forth, and the friction creates a pile of black dust. Keep the rhythm steady, your arms burning, and that dust turns into a glowing ember. It's not easy, your hands blister, your shoulders ache, but when that ember catches, you've created fire from nothing but wood and will. The bow drill wasn't just mechanics. It was a test of patience, a dance with the materials. Medieval villagers taught their kids this skill, not for fun, but as a last line of defense against the cold. It was the difference between a warm night and a frozen one, a reminder that survival wasn't about tools, it was about knowledge. These skills, slings, traps, fire, were the foundation of survival, but they were just the beginning. You've got your rabbit, your flame, but now you need to turn that catch into a meal and make sure it lasts beyond tomorrow. The medieval world didn't stop at hunting. It was about building a life from what the wild gave you. Let's step closer to the fire, because the next part of the story is about turning the forest into a kitchen, a pantry, and a home, all without a single nail or stove. The sun's dipping low, and the air's getting colder. Stay with me because this is where the medieval world starts to cook. You've got your fire crackling, the rabbit roasting, and a flicker of hope in your chest. But survival isn't just about one meal. It's about making sure you've got food tomorrow, next week, through the winter. Welcome back to Boring History, where we're walking through the medieval wild, unraveling the tricks that kept people alive when the world was anything but kind. You're still in that 13th century forest, the stars peeking through the trees, and you're learning what it means to live off the land. Last time, we hunted with slings and traps and sparked fire from flint and wood. Now, let's turn that fire into a kitchen, that forest into a pantry, and those trees into a shelter. Medieval people didn't just survive, they built systems to thrive, and they did it with nothing but their hands and a refusal to give up. Let's start with cooking, because a fire's only as good as what you do with it. Imagine you're camped by that river, your rabbit ready, but you've got no pot, no grill. What do? You build a folding wooden tripod, a tool so simple it's almost laughable, yet so clever it's still used by bushcrafters today. You cut 3 sturdy branches, oak, ash, whatever, straight and strong, about as tall as you. Notch the tops, tie them with vine or rawhide, and spread them over your fire. Hang your rabbit from the center, or maybe a clay pot if you're lucky enough to have one. This tripod isn't just for cooking. It's a multi-tool. String crossbars between the legs, and you've got a rack for smoking meat or drying herbs. Add damp wood or moss to the fire, and the smoke preserves your catch, turning it into food that'll last through winter. Coastal folk used these to dry fish. Forest dwellers hung mushrooms or roots. It's lightweight, folds in seconds, and if it breaks, you carve another. No nails, no forge, just a hatchet and a mind that knows how to work with the wild. But food isn't just about cooking. It's about keeping it edible when the snow falls and the fields are bare. Medieval people didn't have fridges, but they had something better: ingenuity. Picture a market in a bustling town, the air thick with the smell of fish and bread. A farmer's got a clay pot refrigerator, a trick so smart it feels like cheating. You take 2 clay pots, one smaller than the other, and nest them together with wet sand between. As the water evaporates through the outer pot, it pulls heat away, cooling the inner chamber. Set it in the shade. Keep the sand damp and you've got a cooler for milk, cheese, or stew. Farmers used these to keep butter from melting. Herbalists stored medicines. Fishmongers kept their catch fresh. It's not magic. It's physics, and medieval people figured it out without a textbook. In winter, they went underground, digging root cellars lined with straw or stone. The Earth's steady temperature kept carrots, apples, and smoked meat safe from frost or rot. They balanced moisture with charcoal or vents, turning a hole in the ground into a pantry that could outlast a famine. These weren't just storage tricks, they were lifelines, proof that survival meant planning for the lean times. Now, let's say you've got food, but you need a roof over your head. The wind's picking up, and the forest isn't forgiving. Shelter isn't just a place to sleep. It's a skill, and medieval people built with whatever the land offered. Forget nails or screws. They used pegs and bindings, turning trees into homes. You'd start with a frame. For hardwood posts, oak, ash, hazel, driven into the ground, lashed with bark strips or nettle cordage. Carve pegs from branches, hammer them through notched beams, and you've got a structure that laughs at wind and rain. Weave smaller branches for a roof, pile on bark or thatch, and pack moss into gaps for insulation. A good builder knew how to angle the roof for runoff, raise the floor to stay dry, and vent smoke from a fire inside. These shelters could be lean-tos for a night or hunting lodges lasting seasons. They were flexible, strong, and built from memory, not blueprints. Parents taught kids to split wood without cracking it, to twist fibers into rope, to find trees that bent but didn't break. It was architecture for survival, and it worked because it had to. Water's next, because even with food and shelter, a bad drink could end you. Rivers were lifelines but also death traps, carrying waste and disease. Medieval people didn't know about bacteria, but they knew clean water meant survival. Their solution: layered filtration, a system so effective it's still used in survival kits today. Picture a wooden barrel or clay jar filled in layers. Gravel at the bottom to catch debris, fine sand to trap silt, and crushed charcoal to absorb odors and toxins. A cloth or moss layer on top caught leaves or bugs. Water dripped through slowly, the charcoal scrubbing it cleaner with every inch. It wasn't perfect, but it turned stagnant pond water into something you could drink without doubling over. Monasteries built stone troughs for rainwater. Villagers kept filters by their hearths. In cold climates, they melted snow through these jars, drip by drip. This wasn't science to them, it was wisdom, born from watching the earth and learning its tricks. You've got food, shelter, and water, but the cold's creeping in, and your fire's not enough. Winter's coming, and it doesn't care about your plans. The medieval world didn't hand out second chances, but it did hand out lessons, and the next part of this story is about outsmarting the frost. Let's bundle up and see how they kept the cold at bay when the world turned to ice. The air's turned sharp now, and the ground crunches under your boots. You're still with boring history, and we're deep in the medieval wild, where winter wasn't just a season, it was a predator. You've hunted, cooked, and built a shelter, but now the real test begins. The fire's low, the wind's howling, and the cold doesn't just chill you. It steals your strength, your hope, your life if you let it. Medieval people didn't have electric blankets or gas heaters, but they had grit, and they turned the world around them into a shield against the frost. Let's walk through a village blanketed in snow, where every trick was a battle won against winter's grip. Winter in the medieval world was a proving ground. Firewood wasn't infinite, and when it ran low, you had to get creative. One of the wildest tricks was using compost. Not the neat bins of today, but massive piles of straw, manure, and kitchen scraps, steaming with heat as they broke down. Villagers built these piles against house walls or near livestock pens, letting the rot radiate warmth. Some homes had stone benches pressed against the compost, soaking up heat for sleeping or storage. In harsher regions, they built compost sheds, enclosed spaces where the heat from decaying matter kept workshops or emergency shelters livable. The smell wasn't pleasant, but when the alternative was freezing, you didn't complain. This wasn't about comfort. It was about survival, and a pile of rotting straw could mean the difference between a warm night and a deadly one. But compost was just one piece of the puzzle. Let's talk about something simpler, yet brilliant: warming your clothes before you wore them. Imagine waking in a house where the air's so cold your breath hangs like smoke. You don't waste wood heating the room, you heat yourself. After baking bread, peasants would tuck shirts, cloaks, or boots into the warm oven, letting the residual heat soak into the fabric. Pull on a toasty tunic, and suddenly the world feels bearable. Some homes had warming shelves near the hearth, slabs of stone or clay for drying and heating clothes. Others used hot bricks, wrapped in cloth and pressed into boots or bedding. Wool held the heat like a hug. Even rough linen felt like luxury when warmed. This wasn't pampering, it was strategy. Warm clothes kept muscles limber, fingers nimble, and spirits high. In a world where frostbite could claim a hand or a life, a warm cloak was armor. Now, step outside and look at the house itself. Not every village had endless firewood, but the sun, that was free, and medieval people knew how to borrow its warmth. They built homes with dark stone walls, especially on the south side where the sun hit hardest in winter. These walls soaked up daylight, releasing heat slowly after dark. Some villagers arranged courtyards with flat black stones, positioned to catch low winter rays. At night, these stones warmed the air just enough to dull the chill. Others used solar traps, windows covered with oiled paper or animal membranes, letting light in but trapping heat. It wasn't high-tech, but it was clever, a primitive version of passive solar heating. They didn't know the science, but they knew results. If you couldn't burn a fire, you could steal warmth from the sky and store it in stone. Here's where it gets wilder. Sometimes the best heater wasn't a fire, it was a cow. In many peasant homes, livestock lived under the same roof, separated by a low wall or pit. Cows, pigs, and goats gave off constant body heat, warming the air and even the floor. In alpine villages, homes were built with stables below and living spaces above, the animals' heat rising through straw or wood floors. These house barns could be 15 degrees warmer than outside. No fire needed. Kids and the elderly slept closest to the stable walls, where the heat was strongest. Sure, it smelled, and the mooing wasn't exactly a lullaby, but when the wind screamed and the frost crept in, you didn't care. This wasn't desperation, it was engineering, using every resource, even the ones with hooves. Let's talk about beds, because sleeping on a cold floor was a one-way ticket to misery. Medieval people knew the ground sucked heat from your body, so they fought back with layered straw beds. They'd pile straw thickly, topping it with skins or wool blankets, creating a cocoon that trapped body heat. In some homes, they dug shallow pits, lined them with straw or fur, and curled up inside, covering themselves completely. Multiple people in one pit shared heat, kids in the center, adults on the edges. It wasn't comfy, but it worked. Shared body heat could keep you alive through a blizzard. Modern survivalists call this insulation and clustering. Medieval folk called it bedtime. Every layer of straw, every shared breath was a shield against the cold. You're warm now, but warmth without food is a hollow victory. Hunger's waiting, and in the medieval world, every bite was a calculation. Let's move to the kitchen, because the next part of the story is about rations that fueled armies, fed families, and outlasted empires. The frost is fading, but the hunger's growing. Stay with me. You've beaten the cold, your straw bed warm, your cloak toasty from the oven's lingering heat. But now your stomach's growling, and the medieval world doesn't exactly have a pantry stocked with snacks. This is boring history, and we're diving into the food that kept medieval people marching, fighting, and surviving when the world turned lean. You're still in that 13th century village, the snow sparkling outside, the fire low. You've got shelter, warmth, and clean water, but hunger's a different kind of enemy. One that doesn't care about your clever tricks unless they fill your belly. Medieval people didn't eat for pleasure. They ate to endure, and their rations were built to outlast sieges, winters, and wars. Let's sit by the hearth and unpack the foods that fueled a world where every calorie was a victory. Picture a soldier on a muddy march, his pack heavy, his boots soaked. He's not dreaming of a feast. He's reaching for hardtack, a biscuit so tough it could break your teeth. Hardtack was flour and water, baked until it was dry as bone. No yeast, no flavor, just pure endurance. Could last years, surviving damp, rats, and time itself. Armies churned out thousands, stacked in crates or sealed with wax. You didn't eat it raw unless you were desperate. Soldiers soaked it in broth, beer, or stew, or grated it into porridge. Some smashed it with a sword hilt just to make it edible. Weevils? They'd tap them out or eat around them, joking about the extra protein. Hardtack wasn't food. It was a contract with survival, promising you'd live to fight another day. Centuries later, Civil War soldiers ate the same stuff, and museums still have pieces intact and technically edible. That's how tough it was. But man can't live on biscuits alone, especially not in war. Protein was king, and medieval armies leaned hard on salted meat and fish. Pork or beef was buried in salt or soaked in brine, then hung to dry. Fish, cod, herring, eels were split, salted, and smoked until they were hard as leather. This wasn't gourmet. It was calories that could survive a month-long march. Soldiers carried strips of pork in their packs, boiling them into stews or chewing them like jerky. Salted cod was lighter, perfect for long campaigns, especially during Lent when meat was off-limits. Entire fleets hauled cod from Norway to Crusader camps in the Holy Land. Salt was pricey, sometimes worth more than the meat itself, and a barrel of salted beef could be traded like gold in a siege. If it went bad, you cut away the rot or ate it anyway, because hunger didn't negotiate. Fat was another hero, the kind of fuel that kept you moving when the world turned cruel. Hard cheeses, pressed and waxed, were portable powerhouses, sliced into stews or eaten with hardtack. Butter, salted and packed in pots, traveled in cold climates, melted into porridge or smeared on bread. But rendered fat, lard, suet, tallow was the real MVP. Fried grain cakes, sealed jars, waterproof boots, even protected skin from frostbite. Soldiers made candles from tallow, burning it for light or heat. A spoonful of lard could outshine a handful of grain, and in sieges, it was rationed like treasure. Cheese and fat weren't just food. They were currency, traded for blankets or blades when supplies ran low. Modern MREs owe their soul to these dense, durable rations. Legumes were the unsung heroes, cheap and tough enough to survive a soldier's pack. Lentils, peas, and broad beans lasted months if kept dry, swelling into hearty stews with a bit of salt pork or herbs. Armies carried sacks of them, boiling them in iron kettles or even on heated rocks when pots were scarce. Villages traded beans as tribute, and in lean times they were the last calories left. These weren't fancy, but they were life insurance, packed with protein and fiber to keep you strong. Today's survival pantries stock the same stuff, proof that some ideas never die. Then there's the medieval trail mix, a snack so smart it could have had its own brand. Dried figs, apples, or grapes, mixed with nuts and honey, gave soldiers a quick hit of sugar and fat. Honey preserved the fruit and added a touch of medicine, its antibiotic properties keeping sickness at bay. Some mashed figs with almonds and spices, rolling them into dense bars. Think of it as the original energy bar. Crusaders carried these, blessed by monks, as gifts or rations for the road. It wasn't just food. It was morale, a taste of home in a world of mud and blood. Water was a gamble, often dirtier than the battlefield, so soldiers drank small beer, a low-alcohol brew made from barley or rye. It was safer than river water, full of calories and cheap to make. Armies hauled barrels of it. Monks brewed it in vats, even kids drank it. Warm, cloudy, and gritty, it was liquid bread, keeping you hydrated and alive. Nobles had wine, but for the grunt, a flask of small beer was a shield against disease and despair. Spices weren't just flavor, they were survival. Garlic fought infections, ginger eased nausea, pepper masked spoiled meat. Soldiers carried them in pouches, sprinkling them into stews to keep their bodies running. These were medicine before pills, keeping armies marching when sickness loomed. Campfire stews tied it all together, a pot of whatever you had, barley, beans, a scrap of pork, wild onions, boiled over a fire. Every soldier tossed in something, making a meal that stretched to feed a unit. It wasn't pretty, but it was warm, filling, and a moment of brotherhood before the next fight. But what happens when the food runs out? When the gates are sealed, and the enemy's waiting outside? That's where this story turns dark. Because sieges didn't just test your skills, they tested your soul. Let's step into the shadows and see what it took to survive when the world closed in. Because we're about to face the darkest part of this journey. This is boring history, and we're standing in a walled city, 1290. The enemy camped outside, their banners flapping in the wind. You're trapped, the air thick with smoke and fear. Your food's running low, and hunger's not just a feeling. It's a predator, gnawing at your strength, your hope, your humanity. We've hunted with slings, sparked fires, built shelters, and eaten rations that could outlast empires. But a siege is different. It's not about surviving the wild, it's about surviving yourself. Let's walk these starving streets and see what it took to endure when the world turned to ash. A siege wasn't just a battle. It was a war against time. From day one, food was rationed. Bread sliced thinner, water boiled and reused. Stews became watery gruel, stretched with bones, bark, or hay. Cheese was shaved to slivers, fat doled out by the spoonful. Soldiers and civilians counted every calorie, knowing the gates might not open for months. Hardtack and salted meat were gold, but even they ran low. When they did, desperation took over. Leather belts were boiled into broth, hides chewed for hours. In some sieges, parchment, deeds, letters, even sacred texts was shredded and eaten. Dogs and cats vanished, then rats became currency, their stew a luxury. Chroniclers whisper of darker things. In Antioch, 1098, or Jerusalem's fall, bodies were dug up, some eaten in secret. The line between human and animal blurred, and survival became a scar you carried forever. But even in this hell, medieval people fought back with cunning. At Carcassonne, defenders smuggled grain through hidden tunnels. In Eastern Europe, rooftop gardens of peas and herbs tricked scouts into thinking the city was stocked. Deception was as vital as rations, buying time until relief came or the enemy broke. Some turned to panforte, a dense bar of nuts, fruit, and honey from Siena. Crusaders carried it, knights blessed it, and in sieges, it was a lifeline. Calories, protein, and hope in a sticky brick. Spices like cinnamon and pepper kept it fresh and boosted health. A medieval superfood born for war. What makes these stories hum is their humanity. Medieval people weren't superheroes, they were you and me, pushed to the edge and finding ways to push back. They used slings and traps to hunt, tinderboxes and bow drills to spark fire, tripods and clay pots to cook and store. They warmed themselves with compost, stones, and shared body heat, ate hardtack and small beer to keep marching, and in sieges, they clung to hope with every trick they knew. These skills weren't just tools. They were a mindset, a refusal to let the world win. Today, we've got supermarkets and central heating, but the medieval world whispers a truth we can't ignore. Survival isn't about stuff. It's about knowledge. A sling, a spark, a straw bed, a handful of beans. They're not relics. They're lessons. Bushcrafters still braid slings. Homesteaders build root cellars, and preppers stock hardtack. Because these ideas work. They're not flashy, but they're tough like the people who made them. So next time you're out in the cold, hungry or lost, think of that shepherd with his sling, that mother warming cloaks by the hearth, that soldier chewing panforte in a crumbling city. They didn't just survive, they taught us how. That's the end of our journey through the medieval wild. And I'm so glad you came along. If this story lit a spark in you, hit that subscribe button and join the Boring History family. We've got more tales where this came from. Drop a comment below. Which skill would you try first? The sling? The bow drill? This is Boring History signing off.